Savannah Mitchell, 32, felt the Christmas dinner freeze as her father's words hung in the air. "You're disinherited, effective immediately." Diane, her stepmother, smirked triumphantly. 2 years of manipulation had culminated in this moment. The room waited for tears for begging. Instead, Savannah calmly sipped her wine and replied, "You might want to check your bank account first, Dad." The color drained from Diane's face as 20 years of assumed family loyalty shattered in an instant. Before I continue this story of family betrayal and justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this family drama already has you hooked, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Now let's dive deeper into how I discovered my stepmother's elaborate scheme and the sweet karma that followed. I grew up in Boston as the only child of Richard and Elizabeth Mitchell. My father built a successful investment firm from nothing, working 80-hour weeks while maintaining an unwavering presence in my life. Every Sunday was our day: museum visits, sailing on the harbor, or simply reading books side by side in his study. He taught me the value of financial independence and analytical thinking skills that would later become my salvation. My mother died from breast cancer when I was 14, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. For 3 years, Dad and I navigated grief together, forming an even tighter bond. I became his confidant, and he became my rock. Our Sunday traditions continued, though tinged with melancholy. We lived in a beautiful balance of remembering Mom while still moving forward. Everything changed when I turned 17, and Dad introduced me to Diane Fletcher, a charming widow he'd met at a charity gala. With her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and effortless social grace, she seemed to breathe life back into my father. I was in my senior year of high school preparing for college, and though I felt uneasy about how quickly their relationship progressed, I wanted him to be happy. "She makes me feel young again, Savannah," he said one evening as we shared pizza in our kitchen. "I never expected to find someone after your mother." I nodded, swallowing both my slice and my reservations. "I'm happy for you, Dad, really." 6 months later, they married in an intimate ceremony. Diane brought her 2 children into our lives, Marcus, who was 20, and Heather, 19. Our family home suddenly felt crowded with unfamiliar dynamics and competing needs. I made genuine efforts to connect with my new step-siblings, inviting them to movies and cooking dinners, but was met with polite indifference. "They need time," Dad assured me. "It's a big adjustment for everyone." I left for college at Northwestern that fall, studying finance and economics, following in my father's footsteps. During holiday breaks, I returned to a home that felt increasingly foreign. Family photos that had featured my mother were gradually replaced with new ones. My childhood bedroom was redesigned as a proper guest room, because, as Diane explained, "You're building your own life now, dear." The subtle exclusion grew more pronounced over the years. Family vacations were planned during my exam periods. Sunday calls with Dad became shorter, often interrupted by Diane needing him for something urgent. When I graduated with honors and landed a prestigious position at a financial consulting firm in Boston, Dad attended the ceremony alone because Diane had organized a spa weekend with Heather that couldn't be rescheduled. I maintained a cordial relationship with my stepmother and her children, attending holidays and occasional family gatherings. During one Thanksgiving dinner in my mid-20s, I noticed Dad seemed unusually withdrawn. When Diane mentioned their recent decision to sell our family's Cape Cod vacation home, a place filled with memories of my mother, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. "It was just sitting empty most of the year," he explained later when we were alone. "It makes financial sense." "Did you want to sell it, Dad?" I asked carefully. His hesitation told me everything. "Sometimes compromises are necessary in a marriage, Savannah." As the years passed, I watched my father gradually withdraw from his lifelong friends. His golf buddy of 30 years, Walter, stopped receiving invitations. His business partner James was no longer welcome at family gatherings because Diane found him crude. Dad's sister, my Aunt Patricia, complained that her calls went unanswered for weeks. By the time I turned 30, I had built my own successful career as a financial analyst specializing in fraud detection. The irony wasn't lost on me when I began noticing discrepancies in my father's behavior around financial matters. He became evasive when discussing his retirement plans. The quarterly updates he'd always shared about the family investments stopped entirely. "Diane handles all that now," he would say dismissively. "She has a good head for these things." My concerns crystallized during last year's 4th of July family barbecue. I overheard Diane on the phone in Dad's study discussing what sounded like investment transfers. Her hushed tone and careful phrasing triggered my professional instincts. When she emerged, her smile seemed plastered on. "Just checking in with my sister," she explained, without being asked. 2 weeks later, I received a troubling call from Walter, Dad's estranged golf friend. "Savannah, I don't want to overstep, but something's not right with your father," he said, his voice tight with concern. "James and I tried to have lunch with him last month to discuss the old investment group, and he seemed confused about his own finances. He mentioned something about consolidating accounts that Diane is managing now. When we expressed concern, he got defensive and left." My stomach twisted. "What kind of consolidation?" "He said something about simplifying by moving everything into joint accounts for easier management." "Savannah, your father was always meticulous about diversification and security. This isn't like him." I thanked Walter for calling, a cold certainty forming in my gut. That night I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. The financial analyst in me recognized the warning signs. The daughter in me refused to believe it. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong in my father's house. The next morning, I received another call that would set everything in motion. It was from my father's longtime attorney, Michael Brennan. "Savannah, I think we need to talk," he said, his tone grave. "It's about your father's estate planning. There have been some changes." The following weekend, I drove to my childhood home, unannounced, something I hadn't done in years. Dad's silver Audi was missing from the driveway, but Diane's white Mercedes gleamed in the afternoon Sunday. I still had my key, though I usually called before visiting. Something told me surprise was necessary this time. I let myself in quietly, hearing Diane's voice floating from my father's study. She was speaking animatedly on the phone, the door half open. I moved silently through the foyer, years of ballet training, making my steps whisper quiet on the hardwood floors. "It's almost done, Marcus," she was saying. "Richard has signed the new will. Savannah's completely cut out except for some sentimental items. Once the accounts are consolidated next month, we'll have full access." I froze, my hand gripping the wall for support. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," she continued, laughing softly. "He thinks it's all about estate tax planning. The man built a financial empire but hands over everything because I bat my eyelashes and mention legal jargon." My heart hammered against my ribs as rage and disbelief warred within me. "The retirement accounts are next." His financial advisor raised some concerns, but I convinced Richard the man is just trying to keep managing fees by complicating things. She paused, listening. "Of course, I'm being careful. This isn't my first rodeo, dear. Remember Gerald?" I backed away silently, mind racing. Gerald? Who was Gerald? And what did she mean by "not my first rodeo"? I slipped out as quietly as I'd entered, driving 3 blocks away before pulling over my hands, shaking too badly to continue. My professional training kicked in. Step 1. In fraud investigation, document everything. I pulled out my phone and recorded everything I'd heard while the details were fresh. Step 2. Gather background information. I called Michael Brennan from my car. "Can we meet today? It's urgent," I said, when he answered. 3 hours later, I sat in Michael's home office, a space filled with law books and family photos, including several with my father from their college days. Michael had always been Uncle Mike to me, though we'd had less contact since Diane entered the picture. Richard changed his will last month, Michael confirmed, his face grave. I advised against the changes, but he was insistent. Said it was his decision and he didn't need my outdated perspective. Those weren't his words, Savannah. I've known your father for 40 years. What exactly did he change? I asked, though I already knew. Everything. You've been essentially removed as a beneficiary. There's a small trust with some family heirlooms, but the bulk of the estate, the business interests, investments, real estate, it all goes to Diane. Even items that were explicitly promised to you in previous versions, like your mother's jewelry collection. The mention of my mother's jewelry sent a shock of pain through me. Dad had always promised those pieces would come to me. They weren't even particularly valuable, just irreplaceable in sentiment. Has he moved his accounts yet? I asked, financial analyst mode fully engaged. Michael looked surprised. How did you know about that? I explained what I'd overheard, watching Michael's expression shift from concern to alarm. There's more, he said, pulling out a file. I've been keeping notes of changes in Richard's behavior and decisions over the past 18 months. They didn't make sense individually, but together. He pushed the file toward me. Savannah, I believe your father is being financially manipulated, possibly even through undue influence techniques. I spent the next hour reviewing Michael's meticulous documentation. Properties sold well below market value to Diane's connections. Investment decisions contradicting every principle my father had ever espoused. Charitable commitments to organizations my father had supported for decades suddenly canceled. What about this Gerald she mentioned? I asked. Michael frowned. I don't know any Gerald in your father's circle. That weekend became a blur of investigation. I called in sick to work on Monday and set up at a hotel near my father's house, creating a makeshift command center. My laptop spreadsheets and notes covered every surface as I dove into Diane's past. It took 3 days and several expensive database searches through my professional contacts before I found him. Gerald Hoffman, a wealthy widower from Chicago, who had married a woman named Diana Faulkner 8 years ago. Diana, whose driver's license photo matched my stepmother Diane Fletcher, had been married to Gerald for 14 months before his children had her investigated for suspicious financial activities. The case had been settled privately, with Diana disappearing with an undisclosed sum. There were others before Gerald. A trail of name changes and wealthy vulnerable men stretched back 15 years. Diana, Diane, Dee, slight variations, same woman, same pattern. Armed with preliminary evidence, I attempted to talk to my father. I invited him to lunch at our favorite seafood place in Boston Harbor, deliberately choosing a location filled with memories of our Sunday outings. Dad, I need to talk to you about something important, I said after we'd ordered. If it's about the will, Savannah, those decisions are final, he said immediately, his tone unusually hard. Michael shouldn't have discussed private matters with you. This isn't just about the will, I said carefully. It's about Diane. I have concerns. Stop right there. His face flushed with anger. Your jealousy of Diane was understandable when you were a teenager, but it's unbecoming now. She's been nothing but good to me, good to this family. Dad, please just look at these documents. No. He stood up, throwing his napkin down. I will not have you disparaging my wife with whatever you've cooked up. You work with numbers all day and think you understand people. Diane understands me, supports me. What have you done except judge my choices from the sidelines? His words stung like physical blows. I've always supported you, Dad. By questioning my judgment, by digging into my personal affairs. That's not support, Savannah, that's control. Maybe you're more like your mother than I thought. She never trusted my decisions either, I gasped. Dad had never spoken ill of Mom, not once in all the years since her death. He seemed to regret the words immediately, his face crumpling slightly before hardening again. "I think we're done here." He threw several bills on the table and walked out, leaving me alone with 2 untouched plates of food and a shattered heart. I sat there for nearly an hour, tears streaming down my face. The father I knew would never speak to me that way, would never dismiss me so completely. The father I knew would never invoke my mother's memory as a weapon. In that moment, I knew for certain the man who left the restaurant wasn't really my father. He was a man under someone else's influence, someone who had methodically isolated him and poisoned him against everyone who truly cared for him, especially me. That night, I called Michael Brennan again. He wouldn't even look at the evidence, I said, my voice raw from crying. "I was afraid of that," Michael sighed. "This is classic isolation behavior in financial exploitation cases. The victim defends the exploiter and rejects help from others." "So what do we do now?" I asked. "We protect him even from himself," Michael replied firmly. "Savannah, are you willing to risk your relationship with your father to save him?" "What relationship?" I said bitterly. "It's already gone. But I won't let her take everything else too." "Then we need a plan," said Michael. "A comprehensive, legally sound, financially sophisticated plan." By the time we hung up, the outline was forming in my mind. I would use every skill, every contact, every resource I had developed in my fraud detection career. If Diane thought she had found an easy mark in my father, she was about to discover she'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. The next morning I requested an immediate 2-week leave of absence from work, citing a family emergency. My boss, knowing my impeccable record, approved it without question. I assembled a small team of trusted professionals, a forensic accountant colleague, a private investigator recommended by Michael, and a cybersecurity expert who owed me a favor. Our first task was comprehensive background research on Diane Fletcher, or rather Diana Faulkner as she was born. The private investigator Ramon uncovered a pattern that confirmed my worst fears. Before Gerald Hoffman there had been Arthur Jenkins in Seattle, and before him Thomas Mercer in San Diego. Each was a wealthy older man, each had been systematically isolated from family and friends, and each had experienced unexplained financial losses during their relationship with Diana, divided by Diane. "She's good," Ramon admitted as we reviewed his findings in my hotel room. "Changes just enough details each time to stay under the radar. Different states, different social circles, slight name variations." "But why wasn't she caught?" I asked, staring at the timeline we'd created on the wall. "Family embarrassment mostly," Ramon explained. "These men are proud. Their children didn't want public scandal. Private settlements were easier, and she was smart enough to take a payoff and disappear before things escalated to criminal charges." My forensic accountant friend Layla focused on tracking my father's financial activity over the past 2 years. What she found was alarming: a gradual but accelerating liquidation of diversified investments into cash, followed by transfers to new joint accounts. "She's being methodical," Layla observed, pointing to transaction patterns. "Starting with smaller, less noticeable assets and working up to the larger ones. The pace has increased in the last 3 months. She's getting ready for something big." "The retirement accounts," I murmured, remembering Diane's phone conversation. "She mentioned consolidating them next." Layla nodded. "And those are the largest single assets besides the family business interests. If she gets control of those, she could empty them and disappear," I finished grimly. The cybersecurity expert Javier focused on digital evidence. With careful maneuvering and avoiding any illegal hacking, he was able to document Diane's online activities using data from legitimate sources and publicly available information. "She's been researching property values in the Cayman Islands," he reported, showing me search patterns. "And she's been in regular contact with someone named Anton Kozlov, a known facilitator for moving large sums internationally." While my team gathered evidence, Michael worked on the legal strategy. Because my father was not mentally incapacitated just under undue influence, our options were limited. We couldn't simply petition for guardianship. Instead, we needed to work within the boundaries of what we could legally protect. We focus on what hasn't been changed yet, Michael advised. And we need to move quickly but carefully. The first step was securing the retirement accounts. As it happened, I was still listed as the emergency contact on my father's primary accounts, something Diane had apparently overlooked. Using this status, I was able to place a fraud alert that would require additional verification for any major changes or transfers. For the business interests we employed a more sophisticated approach. Years earlier, my father had set up a series of trusts with specific transfer conditions that couldn't be easily undone without triggering tax consequences. Michael worked with the trust administrators to enforce the strictest interpretation of those conditions, effectively creating a temporary barrier to any hasty transfers. Perhaps our most challenging task was building a case that would convince my father. We needed evidence so overwhelming, so indisputable, that not even Diane's influence could explain it away. This required patience and precision. "We need recordings," I said during one strategy session. Her own words. Ramon nodded thoughtfully. "I might have an approach. But it's risky." His plan was elegant in its simplicity. Ramon would pose as an associate of Anton Kozlov, approaching Diane with concerns about the planned transfers. The conversation would be recorded legally, as Ramon would inform her of the recording for mutual protection, a common practice in dubious financial dealings. Meanwhile, I reached out to my father's old friends and business associates who had been pushed aside. Walter James, Aunt Patricia, and others who had known my father for decades. Their testimonies about the changes in his behavior and decisions formed a compelling narrative of isolation and manipulation. As our dossier of evidence grew, so did my determination. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about saving my father from someone who saw him only as a means to an end, who had systematically dismantled his relationships and was now dismantling his life's work. One unexpected ally emerged during this process: my stepbrother Marcus. Ramon's surveillance had captured a heated argument between Marcus and Diane outside a restaurant in Cambridge. "I didn't sign up for this level of deception," Marcus had said, his voice clear on the recording. "Taking advantage of his generosity is one thing, but this is fraud, Mom." "Don't be naive," Diane had replied coldly. "This is what we do. This is how we survive." Ramon approached Marcus carefully, revealing only that he was investigating Diane on behalf of concerned parties. To our surprise, Marcus agreed to talk. "She's done this before," he confirmed in a quiet coffee shop meeting. I was younger then, didn't fully understand. By the time I realized what was happening with Gerald, it was too late to stop it. He looked genuinely troubled. "Your father is different, though. He's been kind to us, treats us like family. I didn't know she was going to take everything from you." "Will you help us?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "I can't testify against my mother. But..." He slid a USB drive across the table. "Here are emails and photos from the Gerald situation. And recordings of her discussing plans for your father's accounts. She doesn't know I kept them." This was the breakthrough we needed: evidence from within Diane's inner circle that couldn't be dismissed as misunderstanding or jealousy. As Christmas approached, I knew the confrontation was inevitable. Diane's plans were accelerating. According to our sources, she had meetings scheduled with financial institutions in early January, likely to begin the process of moving funds offshore. The pieces were in place. The evidence was secured in multiple locations. The legal groundwork was laid. All that remained was the moment of truth: Christmas dinner at my father's house, where Diane believed her victory would be complete with the formal announcement of my disinheritance. The night before, Michael called me. "Are you sure about this, Savannah? Once we do this, there's no going back." Your relationship with your father, my real relationship with my father, ended when Diane entered our lives, I said firmly. If there's any chance to get him back, this is it. And if not, at least I'll have protected him even if he hates me for it. He won't hate you, Michael said gently. The Richard I know is still in there somewhere. We just have to reach him. I packed the evidence into a slim briefcase, selected documents, a tablet with the recordings, bank statements showing the protective measures we'd taken. Then I laid out my outfit for Christmas dinner, a simple green dress my mother had loved, her small pearl earrings, and a determined spirit that would not be broken. As I fell into an uneasy sleep, I thought of all the Christmases before Diane, the laughter, the traditions, the love that had seemed unbreakable. Tomorrow would determine whether any of that could ever be recovered, or if it was lost forever. I was ready. Christmas Day dawned with a light snow dusting Boston coating the city in postcard perfection. I spent the morning rehearsing scenarios in my head, reviewing key documents and steadying my nerves. By the time I pulled into my father's driveway at 4 o'clock, I felt strangely calm, the focused calm of someone who has prepared thoroughly and accepted all possible outcomes. The house was decorated lavishly with professionally arranged garlands and twinkling lights framing every window. Nothing like the homemade decorations my mother had loved. Inside, the scent of pine and cinnamon mingled with expensive perfume. Diane greeted me at the door in a red designer dress, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Savannah, darling, Merry Christmas." Her air kiss landed near my cheek. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, matching her false warmth as I handed over a bottle of wine. "Is Dad in the study, living room with the others?" Her gaze flickered to the slim briefcase I carried. "Working on Christmas, dear. Some things never change." "Some things shouldn't change," I countered quietly, moving past her into the house. The living room presented a tableau of forced festivity. My father sat in his leather armchair looking thinner than I remembered, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. Marcus and Heather occupied the sofa, both dressed impeccably and both looking uncomfortable. Various family friends and associates Diane had deemed acceptable milled about with champagne flutes. Dad stood when he saw me, his smile genuine but guarded. "Savannah, Merry Christmas." I crossed the room and hugged him tightly, inhaling his familiar sandalwood cologne. "Merry Christmas, Dad." For a moment, I felt his arms tighten around me like they used to before he pulled back, glancing quickly at Diane, who had followed me into the room. "Lovely dress," he commented. "Is that new?" "It was Mom's," I said simply. A flicker of pain crossed his face before he masked it with another sip of scotch. Dinner was served at 5:30, a formal affair with hired waitstaff and a professional chef, another departure from our family traditions of cooking together. I sat opposite Diane with Dad at the head of the table between us, a symbolic positioning that wasn't lost on me. The conversation flowed artificially around holiday plans, business successes, and carefully curated anecdotes. I participated minimally, observing instead. Dad barely spoke, letting Diane dominate the narrative. Marcus avoided eye contact with me, while Heather seemed oblivious to the tension, chattering about her recent ski trip to Aspen. "Savannah has been quite busy lately," Diane remarked as the main course was served. "Mysterious meetings, time off work. One might think you're planning something significant." Her tone was light, but her eyes were calculating. "Actually, I have been," I replied calmly. "Sometimes situations require focused attention." Dad frowned slightly. "Everything all right at the firm?" "The firm is fine," I assured him. "It's family matters that have required my attention." Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Family is so important, isn't it? Speaking of which, Richard, perhaps this is a good time for our announcement." My father shifted uncomfortably, swirling the wine in his glass. "Perhaps after dessert, Diane." "Nonsense. Family business is best discussed openly." She placed her hand over his on the table, her grip visibly firm. "It affects everyone here." I watched my father's resolve crumble under her touch. The brilliant financier, the man who had negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, yielded to her with barely a resistance. "As you wish," he muttered, then cleared his throat. "Savannah, there's something we need to discuss." His eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Your mother and I, that is Diane and I, have been reviewing our estate planning." "Yes, I'm aware," I said quietly. He looked up, startled. "You are Michael Brennan, reached out," I explained, watching Diane's expression darken at the mention of Dad's longtime attorney. "Michael overstepped his boundaries," Diane interjected smoothly. "He's been replaced with someone more aligned with our current needs." Dad nodded mechanically. "The point is, Savannah, we've made some changes that reflect our current family structure. You're an independent adult with your own career. Marcus and Heather and of course Diane will be responsible for the family interests going forward. You're being disinherited effective immediately," Diane clarified with barely concealed satisfaction. "Except for some personal items of sentimental value. I'm sure you understand this is what's best for everyone." The table fell silent. The other guests looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus studied his wineglass intensely. Heather's mouth opened slightly in surprise. Apparently not everyone had been briefed on this dinner theater. I felt all eyes shift to me, waiting for the emotional outburst, the tears, the pleading. Diane's expression was particularly expectant, almost hungry for my pain. Instead, I calmly reached for my wine, took a deliberate sip, and set the glass down precisely. "You might want to check your bank account first, Dad." The simple statement landed like a thunderclap in the silent room. Diane's fork clattered against her plate. "What is that supposed to mean?" she demanded, her composure cracking. I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. "It means Diane, or should I say, Diana Faulkner, or is it Diane Flanders, from the Gerald Faulkner case? I always get confused with her aliases." Gasps echoed around the table. Dad's face showed confusion, while Diane's displayed something far more dangerous, cornered rage. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, but her voice trembled slightly. "Don't you?" I slid several documents across the table. 3 previous marriages, 3 wealthy men, 3 financial exploitation cases settled privately. I turned to my father. "Dad, she's done this before. Multiple times." Dad looked at the documents with growing confusion. "This is absurd." "Diane, tell her." "It's garbage," Diane interrupted. "Fabricated by a jealous daughter who can't accept that her father has moved on." "Then you won't mind explaining these." I removed a tablet from my briefcase and played a recording Diane's voice discussing offshore accounts with Anton Kozlov. Then another her conversation with Marcus about taking everything. The color drained from her face as her own voice betrayed her. Marcus stared at his plate, shoulders hunched. "Dad," I said gently, "Diane has been systematically isolating you from everyone who cares about you. She's been manipulating you into changing your will, consolidating your accounts, and giving her control of everything you've worked for." "That's not true," Diane hissed. "Richard, don't listen to these lies." Dad looked between us, confusion giving way to doubt. "The accounts? You said it was for tax purposes." "It was," Diane insisted. "Your daughter is twisting things." "Then explain why you've been researching property in the Cayman Islands," I challenged. "Explain the meetings with Anton Kozlov, a known facilitator for moving money offshore. Explain your history with Gerald Hoffman and Arthur Jenkins." As each name landed, I saw recognition flicker in my father's eyes. The financial genius who had built an empire was beginning to see the pattern. "But most importantly," I continued, "you should know that your retirement accounts and business holdings are currently secure, Dad. The transfers Diane planned for January won't be happening." Diane's eyes widened. "What have you done?" "Protected my father," I replied simply. "Legal holds fraud alerts and trust provision enforcement. Everything is documented and filed with multiple authorities." I turned back to my father. "Check your phone, Dad. Michael sent you the verification links." With shaking hands, my father pulled out his phone and opened his email. The room remained deathly silent as he reviewed the information, his face passing through shock, disbelief, and finally devastating realization. All this time, he whispered, looking up at Diane with new eyes. Everything was a lie. As the truth dawned on him, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and heartbreak. This wasn't how family should be. This wasn't what Christmas should feel like. But sometimes the path to healing begins with painful revelations. Why don't we all take a moment to process this? I suggested, my voice echoing in the stunned silence. There's a lot to take in, and I think everyone here deserves to understand what's really been happening in this family. I can still picture every face around that table. Some shocked, some confused, some relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. It's a moment that would change everything for our family, though none of us knew yet just how much. What about you? Have you ever had to confront a difficult truth at a family gathering? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. And if you're finding this family drama as intense as we did living through it, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family betrayal and sweet, sweet justice. The next hour unfolded like a surreal dream. Dinner was forgotten as waitstaff awkwardly cleared plates from a table where a family imploded. Most guests made polite excuses and left sensing this was a private matter. Only Michael Brennan, who had arrived at my text message, remained as a supportive presence. My father sat at his desk in the study, methodically reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. His hands trembled slightly as he examined bank statements, legal documents, and background reports. Diane had been confined to the living room, where Marcus was having a heated conversation with her in hushed tones. Heather had fled upstairs, overwhelmed by revelations about her mother she apparently hadn't suspected. "These account transfers," Dad said, pointing to a statement. "I authorized these thinking they were estate simplification measures. They were the first steps in moving your assets where she could access them independently," I explained gently. "The pattern matches what she did with Gerald Hoffman in Chicago." His face crumpled slightly. "Gerald Hoffman? I know that name. We met at a financial conference years ago. Brilliant investor. Last I heard, he'd suffered significant losses after his second marriage." To Diane, I finished quietly. Or Diana, as she called herself then. Dad picked up another document, the recordings transcript. "And Marcus knew he was part of this." "Not entirely," I said, trying to be fair. "Based on what we've gathered, he knew about her past and suspected her intentions, but was conflicted about her methods. He actually provided some crucial evidence." Dad nodded slowly, then turned to a photo showing Diane with an elderly man identified as Arthur Jenkins. 7 years ago. While she was supposedly visiting her sick sister in Seattle, each revelation seemed to age him further, the proud man I'd known all my life, shrinking before my eyes. It broke my heart to watch, but I knew this pain was necessary for him to see the truth. "The retirement accounts," he said, suddenly looking up. "You mentioned you protected them. How I'm still listed as your emergency contact. It allowed me to place temporary fraud alerts requiring enhanced verification for any major changes." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always the clever one, just like your mother." Then his face fell. "Your mother, all these years, the things I've let happen to her memory, to her home, to her daughter." "Dad, don't." "No," he said firmly. "I need to say this. When your mother died, I thought the greatest pain of my life was behind me. I never imagined I would inflict even greater pain on the person we both loved most in this world, you." Tears filled my eyes as he continued. "I replaced photos of your mother. I sold our Cape house. I let Diane redecorate your room. I missed your graduations, your promotions. I believed her when she said you were too busy, didn't call, didn't care." His voice broke. "And when you tried to warn me, I chose her over you. Over 40 years of love and trust, I chose a woman I've known for a fraction of that time. You were manipulated, I said, reaching for his hand. It's a sophisticated form of emotional abuse. She isolated you gradually, created dependency, made you doubt your own judgment. I'm a financial expert, he said bitterly. I counsel clients on avoiding exactly this type of exploitation. How could I not see it? Because it wasn't about finance, Dad. It was about emotion. She targeted your grief, your loneliness, your desire to have a family again after Mom died. A soft knock interrupted us. Marcus stood awkwardly in the doorway. Can I speak with you both? He asked, his voice subdued. Dad nodded curtly, still processing his stepson's involvement in the deception. Marcus entered but remained standing like a defendant before a judge. I want to show you something, he said, pulling out his phone. He pulled up what appeared to be a banking app and turned the screen toward us. This is a joint account Diane set up 2 months ago. She told me it was for family emergency funds, but last week she transferred nearly $2 million into it. Dad's eyes widened. From where? From the sale of your lake property in Vermont. She had you sign the papers during that weekend when you had the flu, said they were routine insurance documents. My father paled, recognizing yet another deception. She was going to leave after the holidays, wasn't she? I asked Marcus directly. He nodded miserably. January 3rd. One-way tickets to Grand Cayman for her, me and Heather. She said you'd be joining us later, he added, looking at my father. But I found passport paperwork in her desk last week, only in her name. She wasn't planning on any of us staying together. Even her own children were disposable, I murmured, pieces falling into place. Just like with Gerald. I didn't know how bad it was until recently, Marcus insisted. I knew she had patterns. But she's my mother. I thought this time was different because… He trailed off. Because what Dad prompted. Because she seemed to actually care about you, Marcus admitted. She talked about you differently. I thought maybe she had genuinely fallen in love this time. A hollow laugh escaped my father. Love. She never loved me. She loved what I could provide. I've transferred the money back to your account, Marcus said, showing another screen on his phone. All of it. And I've forwarded all the emails and documents I have about her plans to Michael. I studied Marcus, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. Perhaps there was one relationship in this tangled mess that could be salvaged. A commotion from downstairs interrupted the moment. Raised voices, then the sound of breaking glass. We rushed downstairs to find Diane attempting to leave with several small items clutched in her arms, including my mother's jewelry box. Going somewhere? I asked coldly. She whirled to face us, her carefully maintained facade completely shattered. The elegant, composed woman was gone, replaced by someone with wild eyes and a calculating expression. This isn't over, she snarled. You think you're so clever, Savannah, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I do, I replied, nodding toward the front door where 2 police officers now stood with Michael. That's why I took precautions. Officers, Michael said formally, this is Diana Faulkner, also known as Diane Fletcher. We have documentation of identity fraud, financial exploitation, and the attempted theft you just witnessed. You can't prove anything, Diane snapped, but her eyes darted to the exits like a cornered animal. The recordings say otherwise, I noted, as does your stepson's testimony and the financial records. But most damning of all, I pointed to the jewelry box. That's theft of family heirlooms caught in the act. And I'd bet anything those diamonds in your pocket aren't costume jewelry either. One of the officers stepped forward. Ma'am, please place those items on the table and keep your hands where we can see them. For a moment I thought she might run. Instead, her shoulders sagged in defeat, or perhaps it was just another performance. She placed the items down with exaggerated care. Richard, she pleaded, turning to my father with tears suddenly streaming down her face. You know I love you. This is all a misunderstanding. Don't let them do this to me, to us. My father stepped forward, and for one terrible moment I feared he might still be under her spell. Instead, he gently picked up my mother's jewelry box and held it to his chest. "Goodbye, Diane," he said, simply turning his back on her. As the officers led her away, the house fell into a profound silence. The Christmas tree lights twinkled obliviously in the corner. Half-eaten dinner plates sat abandoned on the table. The remnants of a family Christmas lay in ruins around us. Dad placed the jewelry box in my hands. "This belongs to you. It always has." I clutched the familiar wooden box, remembering my mother opening it on special occasions, letting me try on her pearls or grandmother's sapphire ring. "I'm so sorry, Savannah," he whispered, "for everything. We have a lot to rebuild," I acknowledged. "But we're still here. We still can." As Marcus awkwardly excused himself to check on Heather, my father and I stood in the wreckage of our family home, the first honest moment between us in years, hanging in the air like the promise of a new beginning. The days following Christmas unfolded in a blur of legal meetings, financial damage assessments, and emotional reckonings. Diane, or Diana as her legal documents confirmed, was charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. She was denied bail due to flight risk, her extensive history of similar schemes finally catching up with her. My father threw himself into cooperating with authorities, providing exhaustive documentation of every transaction, every document he'd signed, every decision that had been influenced during their marriage. The process was grueling but necessary both legally and for his own healing. "It's like waking from a fog," he confessed one evening as we sorted through financial records in his study. "Looking back, I can see all the warning signs, all the moments where I chose to ignore my instincts because she made me feel wanted." I squeezed his hand. "Loneliness is a powerful vulnerability, Dad. She exploited that skillfully." "Not just loneliness," he admitted. "Pride too." I didn't want to admit I might have made a catastrophic mistake. Each compromise made the next one easier. The exploitation had been comprehensive. Beyond the financial manipulation we discovered, Diane had been monitoring Dad's communications, intercepting calls and emails from friends and family. She had created elaborate fictions about my disinterest in family gatherings, while simultaneously telling me Dad was too busy to meet. "She told me you canceled our lunch 3 years ago," I said, recalling a particularly painful memory. "Said you had a business emergency in Chicago." Dad looked stricken. "She told me you had rescheduled because of a work conflict." I sat at that restaurant for an hour waiting. These realizations came like body blows, each one revealing another moment stolen from us, another opportunity for connection deliberately sabotaged. The financial recovery was equally complex. While my preventative measures had protected the core assets, Diane had successfully diverted smaller accounts and sold several properties at below-market rates to accomplices. Recovering these losses would take months if not years of legal action. January brought another challenge: what to do about Marcus and Heather. Despite their mother's actions, they had been part of our family for years, and Dad wasn't ready to sever those bonds entirely. "Marcus helped us in the end," Dad reasoned. "And Heather seems genuinely shocked by everything. They need to understand boundaries going forward," I cautioned. "And we need transparency about their contact with Diane." We arranged a family meeting at Michael's office, neutral territory. Heather arrived first, her usual confident demeanor replaced by uncharacteristic hesitance. "I didn't know," she said immediately, "about any of it. Mom always handled everything and I never questioned it." "Your mother is very convincing," Dad said kindly. "Many people, far more experienced than you, were deceived." Marcus arrived, looking exhausted. "I've been cooperating with the investigators," he reported. "Turning over everything I have. It's worse than I thought. There were 2 other men before Gerald that I didn't even know about." The four of us sat awkwardly, an improvised family unit trying to determine what, if anything, could be salvaged from the wreckage. "What happens now?" Heather asked, her voice small. "With us, I mean." Dad looked to me, clearly wanting my input before making any declarations. "I think that depends on what you both want," I said carefully. "And whether we can build something based on honesty this time." "I'd like to try," Marcus said. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I want to earn it." Heather nodded in agreement, tears welling in her eyes. We established new living arrangements. Marcus and Heather would stay in a small apartment Dad owned downtown while we all took time to process. They would continue their education and jobs with modest support, but nothing like the lavish lifestyle Diane had engineered. As winter yielded to spring, other relationships began to heal as well. Dad reconnected with Walter James and his sister Patricia, rebuilding friendships that had been systematically dismantled. Each reunion brought both joy and pain, as they compared notes on how they'd been manipulated away from each other. "She told me you thought I was becoming senile," Walter revealed during a golf game they finally resumed. "Said you didn't want me around because you were embarrassed by my memory lapses." Dad was horrified. "She told me you were spreading rumors about my business decisions. That you questioned my judgment after Elizabeth died." These revelations were common as the wider circle of friends and family compared their experiences. Diane had created an intricate web of misunderstandings and manufactured conflicts, all designed to isolate my father and position herself as his only trusted confidant. My own healing journey was more complicated. While I had protected my father and exposed Diane's schemes, I couldn't erase the years of estrangement or the painful words we had exchanged. Trust once broken requires more than good intentions to rebuild. "I should have believed you," Dad said during one of our weekly dinners, now a reinstated tradition. "When you first raised concerns about Diane, I chose her version of reality over yours, and I'll never forgive myself for that." "It wasn't just about Diane," I admitted. "We started growing apart after Mom died. The remarriage accelerated it, but the distance was already forming." This honesty opened a new phase in our reconciliation, one where we acknowledged the cracks in our relationship that had existed before Diane exploited them. We began seeing a family therapist separately and together, working through layers of grief, betrayal, and regret. By summer, the legal proceedings against Diane were advancing steadily. She had attempted several manipulative tactics from jail, tearful phone calls to Dad, pleading for forgiveness letters to Marcus and Heather, portraying herself as the victim of my jealous scheme, even a fabricated medical emergency designed to elicit sympathy. None of it worked. The spell was broken, and each manipulation attempt only strengthened our resolve and our unity. My professional life unexpectedly benefited from the ordeal. My experience uncovering Diane's scheme led to a promotion at work, heading a new division focused on elder financial exploitation cases. I began speaking at industry conferences, sharing our story with names changed to help financial professionals recognize similar patterns. During one such conference in Chicago, I met Gerald Hoffman's son Peter, who had led the investigation into Diane, divided by Diana's exploitation of his father. "You got further than we did," he acknowledged as we compared notes over coffee. "We just wanted her gone. You actually built a case that might keep her from doing this again." "It was personal for me," I explained. "I couldn't just remove the threat. I needed to understand it." "Your father's lucky to have you," Peter said. My dad never fully recovered from the betrayal, died still believing she had loved him at some point. His words stayed with me on the flight home, a reminder of how differently our story might have ended without intervention. By fall, we had recovered most of the diverted assets, though some properties had been sold irrevocably. Dad seemed less concerned with the financial losses than I expected. "It's just money," he said, with a shrug that would have been unthinkable from the meticulous financier I'd known all my life. "I've learned what actually matters." As the one-year anniversary of the fateful Christmas dinner approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. My father and I spoke daily now. The family home was being redecorated, removing Diane's influence and incorporating elements that honored my mother's memory. Marcus had started working at Dad's firm in an entry-level position, determined to earn his place legitimately. Heather had transferred to a local college, stopping by regularly for advice on her business courses. It wasn't the family I had grown up in, nor was it the one Diane had engineered. It was something new, fragile, imperfect, but built on a foundation of hard-earned truth rather than comfortable illusions. The final piece fell into place in November when Dad asked me to meet him at his attorney's office. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said as we sat across from Michael. "About the future, about the family business, about everything we've built and almost lost." He slid a document across the desk, a new estate plan and business succession strategy. "I'd like you to become the trustee," he said, simply. "For everything. Not because you're my daughter, but because you've proven yourself the most qualified person to protect what matters." I scanned the document, noting that it included provisions for Marcus and Heather as well, structured in ways that encouraged growth and responsibility rather than dependency. "Are you sure?" I asked. "After everything that happened because of the last estate plan." "That's exactly why I'm sure," he replied firmly. "I've seen what happens when I make these decisions based on emotion rather than wisdom. I trust your judgment, Savannah, not just about money but about people." As I signed the papers, I felt the weight of the responsibility, but also a profound sense of healing. The trust that had been broken was being rebuilt, stronger and wiser than before. "One more thing," Dad said as we left Michael's office. "I was thinking we might revive our old tradition this year." "Which one?" "Christmas at the Cape House." My heart skipped. "But you sold the Cape House." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in years. "I bought it back. Closed last week. It needs some work, but I thought maybe we could drive down this weekend, see what needs to be done before the holidays." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him tightly. "I'd like that very much." Walking arm in arm to our separate cars, I realized that the path to justice had ultimately led to something more valuable than revenge. It had led to restoration. 1 year later, snow fell gently outside the windows of our restored Cape Cod house. The Christmas tree, decorated with the mismatched ornaments my mother had collected over decades, sparkled in the corner. The dining table was set for 7, with my mother's china and crystal brought out of storage for the occasion. Dad bustled in the kitchen, insisting on cooking his famous prime rib, despite my offers to help. Some battles weren't worth fighting, I had learned. His need to contribute to create something for his reconstructed family was more important than culinary perfection. I stood by the window watching the ocean waves crash against the winter shoreline. This house held so many memories: my mother teaching me to bake cookies in the small kitchen, Dad and I building sandcastles on the beach, family game nights by the fireplace. Diane had engineered its sale, knowing its emotional significance. Reclaiming it felt like reclaiming a piece of our true history. A car pulled into the driveway, Marcus and Heather arriving together. Behind them, Walter and Aunt Patricia, our small Christmas gathering of people who had fought their way back to each other. The past year had been one of remarkable transformation. Diane's trial had concluded in September with a 15-year sentence. The evidence was overwhelming, strengthened by testimony from victims of her previous schemes, who came forward after her arrest made national news. The woman who had manipulated so many lives would have a very long time to reflect on her actions. Marcus had proven himself surprisingly dedicated at Dad's firm, working diligently from the bottom up, rather than expecting privileges. He had begun dating one of my colleagues from the Financial Crimes Division, a relationship I viewed with cautious optimism. Heather had struggled more with the aftermath, requiring therapy to process her mother's true nature and her own unwitting role in the family deception. She had recently changed her major to psychology, determined to understand the patterns that had shaped her childhood. Dad greeted our guests warmly. The stiffness that had characterized him during the Diane years completely vanished. He hugged Walter enthusiastically, the two old friends, now inseparable again. Aunt Patricia fussed over the table settings, relieved to be welcomed back into her brother's life. As we gathered around the table, I couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought us here. From the devastation of last Christmas to this moment of genuine connection, it seemed almost miraculous. Dad stood to carve the roast, then paused, raising his glass instead. "Before we eat, I'd like to say something." His voice was steady, his eyes clear. Last year at this time I had lost sight of what truly matters. I had allowed myself to be separated from the people who genuinely care about me. He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on each face. "Because of one person's courage," he nodded to me, "I've been given a second chance to recognize real love and loyalty." Tears glistened in his eyes as he continued. "Elizabeth," his voice caught on my mother's name, "would be so proud of the woman our daughter has become. And she would be delighted to see our true family gathered here again in the home she loved." He raised his glass higher. "To truth, to justice, and to the family we choose to be, not the one that's forced upon us." We clinked glasses, the simple toast carrying the weight of everything we'd survived together. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed naturally, Walter recounting golf stories, Aunt Patricia sharing family gossip, Marcus discussing his new projects at work. The awkwardness that had initially characterized our reconstituted family gatherings had given way to something more authentic. After dessert, Dad pulled me aside to the small study overlooking the ocean. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small wrapped package from his desk drawer. Inside was a key and a legal document, the deed to the Cape House transferred to my name. "Dad, I can't." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "This house should belong to someone who truly values what it represents. Our family history, your mother's memory." He smiled softly. "Besides, I'm not going anywhere. I expect full visitation rights and a standing invitation to Christmas dinner." I hugged him tightly too, moved for words. As we rejoined the others in the living room for coffee, I observed the scene with a full heart. Marcus and Heather arguing good-naturedly about a board game, Walter dozing contentedly by the fire, Aunt Patricia arranging cookies on a plate. This was family imperfect, sometimes complicated, but bound by genuine care, rather than manipulation or obligation. Later, as our guests prepared to leave, Dad pulled me into another hug. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not just for saving me from Diane, but for believing we could find our way back to being a family." "We always were," I replied. "We just lost sight of it for a while." As the house quieted, I sat alone by the Christmas tree, reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the devastating confrontation to this moment of peace, it had been a path filled with pain, but ultimately leading to justice and healing. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving behind not just wreckage, but also unexpected gifts, stronger bonds, clearer vision, deeper understanding of what family truly means. Not blind loyalty or obligatory connection, but a choice made daily to protect, support, and cherish one another through all of life's challenges. I thought of Diane sitting in her prison cell, surrounded by the consequences of her choices. Perhaps there was a lesson there about karma, about how the harm we inflict eventually finds its way back to us. But more importantly, there was a lesson about resilience, about how even the most devastating betrayal can become the foundation for something stronger and more authentic than what was lost. As I watched the snow continue to fall outside, I felt grateful for second chances, for hard truths that set us free, and for the courage to fight for those we love, even when they can't see they need saving. This Christmas, unlike last, was about genuine celebration, not of material gifts or superficial harmony, but of a family that had faced its darkest moment and emerged stronger, wiser, and more truly connected than ever before. What about you? Have you experienced a moment when family betrayal led to unexpected healing or justice? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of family karma and restoration resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in navigating family complexities. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my life. Your support means everything as I continue to learn what family truly means. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most beautiful transformations.